My name is Kella Whitmore, and I need you to stay with me until the very end of this story, because what happened to me is something most people spend their entire lives too afraid to do. I was the kind of daughter who showed up. Always. The kind who answered every call, wired money without being asked twice, and smiled through dinners where my name only came up when someone needed something. I was the safety net nobody ever thanked. And on one ordinary evening, sitting at the same long dining table I had helped renovate after my father's so-called temporary setback, my brother looked straight at me in front of everyone and said the words I will never forget. "Let's get rid of the useless people in this family. You're first." He knocked his glass over as he stood, like the gesture needed drama to land. And my parents laughed. Not nervous laughter. Not uncomfortable laughter. They laughed loud, comfortable, like it was a joke they had all been waiting for someone to finally say out loud. My mother waved her hand like she was swatting away a fly and said, "All you're good for is your money." The laughter settled. Dinner continued. And I sat there understanding something that no amount of therapy, journaling, or tearful phone calls to friends had ever made this clear before. This was not a bad night. This was the pattern. I am the eldest daughter in the Whitmore family, which in our house meant I was the quiet solution to everyone else's problems. Love was never free in our family. It was billed monthly, and I was always the one paying. My brother Lucas had always been the golden child. Loud, reckless, charismatic, forgiven. The kind of man who could fail spectacularly and still walk back into a room expecting applause. I was his opposite. Reliable. Invisible. When Lucas failed a business, I covered the losses. When my parents needed rent bridged during a bad season, I wired it without a second thought. When legal fees piled up after one of Lucas's reckless decisions, I signed the paperwork and didn't ask questions. They called it family support. Looking back now, I call it conditioning. Because every time I helped without complaint, I trained them to expect it. Every time I stayed quiet through a humiliation, I gave them permission to do it again. My father even laughed at Lucas's joke that night, chiming in, "Don't act shocked. You know he's right." And the terrifying part was I did know. I knew exactly how many transfers I had approved. I knew the dates, the amounts, the emergencies that somehow never stopped being emergencies. But something shifted in me that night. Not anger, not tears. Something quieter and far more dangerous. Clarity. I set my fork down carefully. I looked at the table, at the people who had built their entire financial and emotional infrastructure around my willingness to absorb consequences, and I said one word. "Okay." My mother frowned. "Okay, what?" I stood up, slipped on my coat, and felt lighter than I had in years. As I reached the front door, my phone vibrated in my pocket. It was an alert I had scheduled months ago, back when I still believed loyalty mattered, back when I thought maybe things would change on their own. I glanced at the screen and smiled. I turned back one last time without fully facing them and said, "Actually, you're right. Let's see who's useless." The room went silent. They just didn't know why yet. By the time I reached my car, my hands were completely steady. That scared me more than any anger ever had. I want you to understand something important here, because this story is not just about money. It is about identity. It is about what happens when a family decides that one person's role is to give and builds a whole mythology around that expectation. Years ago, I had fought for scraps of their approval like everyone else. Straight A's, full scholarships, a career that paid well enough to help out. But helping out became a reflex, and reflexes don't require thought. When Lucas failed, I fixed it. When my parents panicked, I wired money. Silence was my currency. Reliability was my personality. They liked me best when I didn't need anything. Lucas used to joke that I was the family's emergency fund. My mother laughed every time. My father called it being practical. Not a single one of them noticed how my life had been quietly shrinking around their needs. Missed vacations. Postponed relationships. A savings account that emptied itself every time Lucas had a new idea that needed seed money he would never repay. That night, driving home alone, I didn't cry. I replayed memories, but they stacked themselves neatly instead of hurting. Patterns are easier to see when you stop hoping they will change. At a red light, my phone buzzed again. Not a reminder this time. A confirmation. Everything I had quietly put in place over the past several months was now fully active. And for the first time, I didn't feel like leaving this family. I felt like letting them stand on their own 2 feet. That was when the real pressure began. Lucas left 3 voicemails before 9 the next morning, each one louder and more fractured than the last. My mother followed with a text that simply said, "Stop being dramatic. Call us." I didn't. I went to work. I sat through meetings. I answered emails. And I felt a strange, almost peaceful distance from my own name, like it finally belonged to me and not to their emergencies. By noon, Lucas showed up at my office unannounced, pacing the lobby like he owned the building. When I stepped outside, his confidence was already cracking, leaking panic at the edges. "What did you do?" he hissed. "I stopped," I said. "Stopped what?" he snapped. "Fixing things you break." His face went red. "You can't just pull support. Dad is counting on you." That word, counting, landed like a stone. Counting on me. Like a balance sheet. Like a guarantee written in invisible ink that I had never actually signed. "You'll regret this," he said, lowering his voice. "We're family." I almost laughed. Instead, I watched him leave, shoulders tight, phone already at his ear, calling someone else to fix what he couldn't. That evening, my father called. No greeting, no warmth, just an order delivered like I was an employee who had forgotten her place. "Transfer the money back." Now, I looked at the framed photo on my desk. Me, younger, smiling too hard, the smile of someone working overtime just to belong. "No," I said. The silence on the line felt brittle, like glass that had been thinned down over years of pressure and was finally about to shatter. "You think you're teaching us a lesson?" he finally asked. I hung up before he finished the sentence. Behind my calm, something irreversible had already begun, and there was no version of this story where I went back. The humiliation came 2 days later, and it came with an audience. My mother hosted one of her carefully staged family luncheons, the kind designed to remind everyone of the hierarchy, who belonged, who owed whom, and who held the power in the room. I was invited last, by text, like an afterthought squeezed in between the dessert order and the seating arrangement. I went anyway, not to reconcile, to observe. Halfway through dessert, my father cleared his throat and stood with his glass raised, and I knew immediately what this was. "We need to address something," he announced, eyes locking onto mine across the table. "Kala has decided to abandon this family." The room murmured. Heads turned. Lucas didn't miss his cue. "She cut us off," he said loudly, playing to the room like he had rehearsed it. No warning. No explanation. After everything we did for her. Someone actually clapped, unsure why, but following the energy in the room. My mother sighed theatrically and said, "We raised her better than this." I felt it then. Not pain, not the crushing chest tightness I had expected, but something sharper. The clarity of being rewritten in real time. The story was being edited right in front of me, and I was being cast as the villain. I reached into my bag slowly, calmly, and placed my phone flat on the table. "If we're sharing stories," I said, keeping my voice completely steady, "let's share the whole one." I tapped the screen. Transaction histories. Dates. Amounts. Years of quiet rescues laid out in clean rows that told a story no speech ever could. The laughter died. Lucas stared at the screen like it had said something in a language he didn't know existed. My father's glass trembled in his hand. I leaned forward slightly. "You didn't raise me," I said softly. "You built me. And that's the difference." I saw it then, something I had never seen on my father's face in 30 years. Fear. I left before anyone could recover enough to form an argument. The air outside felt cleaner, the way it does right before rain. That night I didn't sleep from pain. Surprisingly, there was very little of that. I didn't sleep because I was focused. I replayed every pattern, every assumption they had built their lives around. They believed my value was tied entirely to access, to liquidity, to how quickly I could absorb and fix their messes. So I built my response around subtraction. No explosions, no dramatic speeches, just precision. By morning, I had separated everything that was genuinely mine from everything they had quietly treated as communal property over the years. Accounts I had co-signed but never truly controlled. Automatic payments I had set up out of habit and then forgotten. Guarantees I had agreed to that had slowly made me the invisible safety net for risks I never chose to take. I called my attorney, then my banker, then a CPA who owed me a favor from 3 years back. Each call felt like closing a door gently instead of slamming it. By afternoon, the plan was fully complete. Not designed to hurt them. Designed to stop absorbing the consequences of choices that were never mine to begin with. I circled one date in red on my calendar. That was the day I decided how this chapter would end. Execution was quieter than I ever imagined it would be. I didn't announce anything. I didn't send a message. I let systems do the talking. Automatic transfers stopped. Co-signed accounts reverted to their actual owners. Notifications went out, polite, impersonal, and completely irreversible. By noon, Lucas's credit card declined at a cafe. By 3 in the afternoon, my father's temporary loan triggered a financial review. My phone lit up and didn't stop. Lucas called first, voice shaking in a way I had genuinely never heard before. "It's not working. Fix it." "I can't," I said. "It's not mine anymore." "You did this on purpose," he snapped. "Yes," I said calmly. That evening my parents showed up at my apartment together. My mother cried. My father raged. I let them speak until all the noise had drained out of it, and there was nothing left but the hollow sound of people realizing the floor was gone. "You're destroying this family," my father said, his voice finally breaking. I opened the door wider. "No," I replied. "I'm leaving it." Lucas stood behind them in the hallway, pale and quiet, finally understanding what dependency looks like from the inside when the person holding everything together simply stops. When they left, the hallway was silent. I locked the door. For the first time in as long as I could remember, my money stayed exactly where it belonged. The collapse didn't come all at once. It unraveled slowly, the way things do when they were only ever held together by one person's willingness to keep showing up. Lucas called less. When he did, the anger was gone, replaced by something smaller and more honest. He asked questions instead of making demands. My parents stopped hosting gatherings they could no longer afford. The house went on the market quietly, no announcement, just a listing I stumbled across online one evening. Months later, I ran into my mother at a bookstore. She looked startled, like she had expected to find me smaller. Broke. Apologetic. Instead, I was laughing with a friend, choosing a novel for a trip I had finally booked for myself. "You seem fine," she said. "I am," I answered. She waited for more. For an offer, a bridge, return to old roles, the way you wait for a door you've always walked through to open again. I gave her none. Here at Revenge Chronicles, we tell these stories because they are real, because someone out there right now is sitting at that same table, smiling too hard, wiring money they cannot afford, and calling it love. What they lost was not money. It was certainty. The deep, unearned comfort of knowing someone else would always absorb the consequences of their choices. That night, alone in my apartment, I deleted the last shared document from my drive. A relic of a life built entirely on obligation. I turned off my phone, poured a glass of wine, and watched the city lights flicker on one by one outside my window, each one independent, each one standing completely on its own. For the first time in my life, so was I.